people we know that people often say that the reason why they're leaving is because of the money, but actually it's much more complex than that. And there's been some really interesting research recently. And one of the pieces I just want to share with you is there's a really interesting report from McKinsey, which is talking about the value of human capital. And I just wanted to share this one sort of infographic, if you like, from them. Can I just check? Are you seeing my cursor move around? Yes, yep. Thanks, Shirley. Brilliant.
Yeah.
So what they're saying is, look, we build our own value, our own ability to earn money in the marketplace through various stages in our lives. Clearly, we learn some fundamental skills in early childhood, then through education, we learn specific knowledge and skills, and then we move into the world of work. And as we gain our work experience, we continue to make ourselves more valuable and give ourselves more potential to earn. And their research has shown that this is really a significant factor, and that as our career progresses over this sort of 30-year period that they've plotted here, the earnings that are associated with the skills that we have when we enter the workplace reduces in proportion to the earnings that we receive associated with the experience that we've gained. So the fundamental message in this report is that work experience that enables us to build our skills through our working life is fundamentally important to our ability to progress up, in particular, the earnings ladder. So although pay may be a driver, earnings is a driver, actually the move to the next job may be indirectly linked to pay and more about seeing an opportunity to actually learn and build our skills through experience. So it really just highlights the need for us to, as employers, to be creating opportunities for people to move internally wherever possible, or in small organizations where that's not so possible, to create opportunities nonetheless for people to continue to develop their skills. And we are seeing at the moment, and it was supported by the evidence in this report, that currently 1 in 4 people, employees, is considering leaving in the next 6 to 12 months, where that figure would normally be about 1 in 11. So this is really a very significant issue currently. And some further research from Culture Amp, which was a massive study of 9.5 million employees across 5,500 organizations. These are the reasons that people are giving for leaving. And it's far and away about that personal growth. Also coming in close second, work-life balance and personal reasons, which I think that's probably shifted significantly post-pandemic. Career change, also about that sort of re-evaluation of what's going on. And then compensation coming in next. So by comparison with growth, compensation is relatively insignificant. So I'm going to hand you over now to David, who's going to tell you a little bit about maybe why the reasons people give us for leaving may not reflect the reality that we're seeing in this research.
So I'm going to move to my slide deck and share that. So can you see that brain now?
Yeah, that's good.
Great. So it's really interesting. You know, Ali and I have been talking a lot about this over the last couple of weeks as we've been preparing for this webinar. And it's always interesting that when you say you're going to talk about something, how so much evidence shows up. And it's really curious. Some of the research that I've been doing shows that on average, in any 10-minute conversation, most men and women will lie about 20% of the time. Which when I saw that, I thought that was a pretty shocking statistic. So we're very good at deceiving others. anyway. And the question is, why do we do that? And why particularly do we do that in a situation where we're going to be leaving? And a useful model is the SCARF model, developed by Dr. David Rock. Some of you may be familiar with this already, from the Neuro Leadership Institute, because it looks at what's going on in our brain and what triggers a threat response. And you know, the brain is designed to protect itself from a threat. So if there is a threat response, no matter how sensitive or how small, we will avoid that situation. We're wired to do that. Our ancestors have survived because of it. And there's these 5 factors. And the first one is status. So in many ways, when we're leaving, we don't really want to upset the status of the relationships that we have. And it's predominantly about relationships. But we want to avoid any clash in status. And therefore, we'll just, it's easier to say, look, it's the money, it's not you. And if, you know, even when you think back to teenage relationships, you go like, it's easier just to go like, you know what, it's not you, it's me. I'm ending this relationship. I'm not going to get into all the details about why it's not working. It's easier in an employment relationship as well to be able to go, look, it's a matter of fact, I can get more money elsewhere. I'm off. I'm not going to talk about why or what wasn't working within this organization. And also it creates, we love certainty. The brain needs certainty. And therefore in a conversation, if I were to start to say, I've made a decision that I'm going to leave, and I've done all the thinking behind it, I don't really want to enter into another whole conversation about you wanting maybe to offer me other things to stay or whatever, because that just creates a whole bunch of uncertainty in my life about the plans that I'm making about leaving. And then also this other one, which is about autonomy. I want to stay in control. So I lie to you so that I can stay in control. I can manage the conversation because I'm keeping the conversation just around the topics that I want to talk about. Because otherwise it's going to get complicated. That could damage relationships. And ultimately, I don't want to get into this whole conversation around fairness, about what's fair or unfair. Even if I feel you've been treating me unfairly, it's just too much hassle. And I'd rather just be gone. Now, that triggers something very interesting in the conversation, because all of this stuff is going on in people's brains as the reasons why they don't tell the truth. And what we're suggesting is to create an environment where it's possible to tell the truth much earlier on in the conversation. And we're going to come to that in a minute. So it's all about making sure that we discover the right conditions. Ali, were you going to say something about this, or will I just continue with this one? Ali? No, I'll just
Sorry, I'm on mute. I muted myself. Has to be done once, isn't it? I'll pick this up if you like.
Yep, carry on.
Okay. So let me just, oh my goodness, got a strange option coming up there. Share my screen. It's asking me who can share. Can you stop sharing, please, David? I've got something strange going on here.
Yep, sure. Because really it's about being able to create an environment where people feel that it's okay to talk.
There we go. Yeah, so it's all about creating the right conditions to have people actually tell you what's on their mind and to share with you, perhaps more openly than they otherwise would. And fundamentally important to that is a concept that I know many of you will be familiar with, that we find really, really important, which is the idea of psychological safety. And this is something that's written about by a lady called Amy Edmondson. And she did a lot of research initially in the US in healthcare setting and looking at why, for instance, people don't speak up when they see something going wrong in the operating theatre and that sort of thing. And it can, many of the factors are linked to what David was talking about in terms of SCAR. So things like status, for instance, is a key reason why people don't necessarily speak up and raise their concerns. But psychological safety also relates to that relationship between a manager and their team member and how comfortable that team member feels to actually share their openly and to be transparent and to be comfortable, perhaps talking about what's important to them personally. And so if we're going to start that conversation, we need to start by making sure that we've created an environment that's conducive to our people taking what they perceive to be a personal risk. So what can we do to achieve psychological safety in that context? First of all, that setting the stage, being really, really clear and transparent, particularly about your intention in that conversation. If you're asking people to share their goals, their aspirations, their concerns, then they need to understand what you're going to use that data for, right? So we need to be really clear about and transparent about our intentions and set that stage for the conversation. Then we need to be super proactive. We can't expect people to just come to us and say, I want to have a conversation with you about my development, my goals, what I want next from my role. So we as managers need to invite that conversation and raise concerns if we feel that perhaps there's an issue that needs to be discussed. And then we need to be managing the response, our own response. We need to make sure that if our team member says something that might scarf us, might trigger one of those responses in ourselves, then actually we manage our own response, our own reaction, and make a really conscious effort to be appreciative of the fact that they've been open and transparent and perhaps taken a risk with us, and work together to look for the opportunities that that presents.
I'd just like to add to that, Ali. It reminds me of a couple of clients I've had in the past, especially when they're entrepreneurial business owners who've set up something with someone. When their number two decides to go, they feel like it's a personal stab through their heart because they feel betrayed. It's like they're ending of a marriage. So a lot of the emotions that get wrapped up in this sort of conversation about staying or leaving are really quite profound, and especially with people who've been together for quite a long time, and therefore people avoid all of the emotional stuff by just going, well, you know what, it's easier just to lie and say it's because of the money. But you have to work hard, as Ali said, to create that environment of psychological safety.
Okay, I'm going to hand the baton back to you, David.
Yep, sure. If I share screens again, to go back to my slideshow. So what we'd like to do is talk a bit about the importance of mindset and navigating paradoxes. And some of you will be familiar with paradoxes, but for those of you that aren't, I would just maybe in the chat like to ask, what do we mean by the term paradox? So can you see my screen there? Yeah, okay. So what do we mean by the term paradox? What is a paradox? How would you say in simple terms what a paradox is? In the chat. Or if anybody feels like talking out loud, they can just say. I'm not seeing the chat there.
Teresa's put, hi Teresa, something that seems contradictory, absolutely.
Yeah, appears one way but is actually something else, yes. And things that are in catch-22, okay, that's a good one as well. A different aspect, contradictory, and it seems that it's like, it actually comes, I was with a group the other day and one of them spoke Greek, and paradox means in Greece means unusual. And actually it's very unusual to have two contradictory statements which are both true. Or in the case of behavioral paradoxes, two behaviors which are almost seemingly contradictory, but when they come together form something synergistic. So in the way we explain it is that, it's elements that appear to be oppositional or contradictory, but are nevertheless both true. And I'd like to share with you some paradoxes from the behavioral paradoxes developed by Dr. Dan Harrison. And the first one is the paradox of an equity mindset. And the paradox of an equity mindset is the tendency to assert my needs and respond to the needs of others. And if we look at it, it's simply assertive being the tendency to put forward my own personal wants and needs, and being helpful, the tendency to support other people in achieving their goals. And if we look at this, if we're very high on assertive here on the y-axis and low on helpful, we can end up in this quadrant where we're dominating. And especially in UK culture, it's really inappropriate to be dominating. Nobody wants to be seen to be dominating. So a lot of people actually don't declare their needs. And then people who are actually often very helpful, they want to help others, and maybe if they're low on assertive, they'll actually get into self-sacrificing. And we're finding that a lot of people are falling into this quadrant here. And self-sacrificing people can actually end up being a bit like martyrs, and therefore then feel, oh, this is all very unfair, no one's helping me, but they're not actually declaring their own needs. And what we want really managers to do is to encourage people to have a mutually sustainable relationship by having mutual help. So the mindset of a manager needs to be going like, okay, I want to help my people to grow, but I also have needs that I need to assert what I need them to do for me. But I'm also going to spend time and effort concentrating and focusing on what are their needs, because I know most of the time they're not going to be telling me. So helping them to tease out what is it that they want, what is it that they require, and having a meaningful conversation about that early on so that we don't get to this burnout where they're self-sacrificing and then want to leave. And just a note, we do also sometimes have people on this paradox of equity mindset who are neither assertive nor helpful, and they tend to just be people who are very focused on doing their own job in their own way and getting on with doing the task and not concerned about their own needs or the needs of others. But they also need to be asked, what is it that they want? What is it that they need from their work in order to help them to stay as well? And then over to you, Ali, for the coaching mindset. Do you want to, will I just click through, or do you want to take the screen yourself?
No, I'll take it so that I can point, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I'll stop sharing.
Okay, so the second paradox we wanted to talk to you about was the paradox of the coaching mindset. So this is our tendency to be warm, empathic, and hold others accountable. So up the left, we have the trait of enforcing, the tendency to insist upon the necessary rules being followed. Also, we consider this in terms of the tendency for people to meet our expectations in terms of performance, to deliver against what we're asking them to do. And along the bottom, we have warmth and empathy, which is a tendency to express positive feelings and affinity towards others. So it's not just about quietly having those feelings and keeping them to ourselves behind our desk in our office. It's actually leading back into that, having that conversation, making it clear to the person that we're working with that actually we're interested in them and we care, excuse me, we care about them. So in the context of this conversation that we're having around people leaving, if we're high on enforcing and low on warmth and empathy, well, we'll be perceived by our people perhaps to be harsh. And we know from the research that one of the main reasons that people leave their jobs is because of their manager and their relationship with their manager. So if they're seeing their manager as being really harsh and not caring about them in that relationship, then that will be a good reason why they're leaving. And you can rest assured that they won't be telling you that that's why they're leaving. Equally, if we're high on warmth and empathy and low on enforcing, that means as a manager, we're tending to let people underperform, to not follow the rules, to not do what's expected of them. Now, that might be a bit counterintuitive. You might think, well, that would be quite a good place to work, wouldn't it? I have free reign to do as I please. My manager's not going to hold me accountable. And I suppose if I'm not terribly motivated, not terribly engaged, not terribly bothered about doing a good job, that might well be true. So a permissive approach to management might have the effect of retaining some of those people, but are they the people that you really want? And conversely, those people who are motivated, engaged, capable, really driven to do a good job, the effect of a permissive manager on those people is that they're going to feel that this is really unacceptable. It's a really good way to make sure that your best people decide to go somewhere else if they see that you're not holding their colleagues accountable for delivering against expectations. So permissive isn't helpful either in this context. And in fact, and with a nod to another of our favorite ideas that we thought was too much to include here, but a nod to Radical Candor by Kim Scott, which I definitely commend as a good read. Really, if we're going to be an effective manager and we're going to get the best out of our people and engage them and retain them, then what we need to do is this compassionate enforcing, where we're enforcing with warmth and empathy, because we care enough about our people to have that uncomfortable conversation that enables them to really raise their game and achieve their unrealized potential and the best performance that they can possibly give, which is a win-win for all of us. And that's the territory we need to be in to make sure that people are staying. So related to that is another tool that we find very useful, which is the performance expectations curve. Now, there's a lot going on this diagram, so I'll give you a quick guided tour. Up the left, we have performance, and across the bottom, we have time. And typically, when someone starts a job, their performance may be relatively low initially, but we would expect it to increase quite quickly up this curve during time. And then perhaps when they're completing their induction, the end of their probation period, we would hope to at least be able to see that they are going to be able to meet our minimum acceptable standard of performance to do the job, in essence. But what we find often is that a lot of people tend to stay just above this line as they progress during time, or they may rise up and then drop down. And these are really troublesome because they're doing just enough to keep themselves out of trouble, but they're not really setting the world on fire. And if we're honest, as a manager, they're not really meeting our expectations. But it can be quite tricky to deal with because they're doing just enough that we can't put them into any sort of formal performance-related or capability-related conversation. So this is where we have to move into our toolkit of the things that we can do to unleash this discretionary effort and motivate, develop people and engage them so that they move up this curve. And think of it also from the employee's perspective. If they've found themselves, for whatever reason, just doing enough to keep themselves out of trouble, they're probably not really enjoying their job. They're certainly probably not acquiring the new skills that they need in order to create more value in the employment marketplace. And they're probably in that group of people who are likely to be scanning the environment for opportunities elsewhere. So we need to be concerned about them. But also we need to be concerned about the high performers, the people who are right at the very top of this curve, who are really engaged, really capable, really doing the job, but they're running out of headroom in terms of development. And for those people, the challenge for the manager is to find the next job where they start again at the bottom end or lower down on the performance curve in their new role. So this is very much about looking to see, well, what can we create as the next place for this person? So that's our performance curve.
If you stay with that slide, I'll just talk through it, Ali.
Sure.
So another very related to that, because a lot of managers don't actually clarify expectations, as Ali was saying. So we often have managers that they say, yeah, we talk about minimum standards, but we don't really talk about what our ideal is. And the ideal is something designed to challenge people. So we love Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and his model. Sadly, he died last year after a very productive and interesting life. And he developed the concept of finding flow. So what he had in a nice little 2x2 is like levels of challenge there on the y-axis and levels of skill along the x-axis along the bottom. So if we have a high level of challenge with a low level of skill, we'll actually get to burnout. And a lot of people are actually suffering that at the moment. There's so much workload and they're not necessarily be given the skills or the training to be able to deal with that workload. But conversely, if we have a very high level of skill and not enough challenge, we'll end up being bored or complacent. And both of these extremes will be definitely reasons we find for people leaving. It also causes a lot of stress on both ends. So Mihai Csikszentmihalyi found that actually people who are naturally happy at work and love what they do and have very productive lives do exactly what this diagram is doing. They'll find a level of challenge, then they'll develop more skills, take it easy on the challenges in order to be able to develop their skills so they can then take on the next level of challenge. But they're very conscious of how much challenge to take on and how much skill they need to develop. And when they need to develop skills, they're very proactive in doing that. And that actually, he says, if you can keep to that narrow band without drifting into the stress or burnout or the bored complacently, is being in the flow. And again, we ask managers when we work with them all the time to say, are you having this conversation with your people to know how much challenge they've got, how much skill they've got, and to find ways to work with them? Because going on training these days doesn't always require going on a course. There's so many opportunities to learn from YouTube, from buddying, from podcasts, from articles. And managers need to be really good curators of learning materials and learning opportunities. So how do we stop people leaving? And as we've said before, many times, it's about meaningful conversations. And Ali, were you going to continue with this?
Carry on, David.
Yeah, okay, you just carry on through the slides. So go to the next slide. It's really interesting. There's a book called Love Him or Lose Him by, everyone seems to be talking about this at the moment, and I'm not sure if you've actually discovered it yourself. It's by Beverly Kay and Sharon Jordan Evans. But interestingly, it was written in 1999. But suddenly after the pandemic and with these high levels of labor turnover that Ali mentioned earlier, where about 1 in 4 people are now considering leaving their jobs, this book has become really popular again, and it's gone into its 6th edition. And what they've said all along is it's really important to have these 10 stay factors. So going back to Mahey Csikszentmihalyi and flow, exciting work and challenge is really important. Everything that Ali said about the McKinsey report about career growth, learning and development, opportunities to be able to add value to your own career, working with great people, which is all about relationships. And of course, fair pay is there. And now, interesting that it's fair pay, not necessarily high pay. So it's really important to recognize where are you at with regards to your pay bands, what's the market rates, and that you're having open conversations with people about that. Supportive management, good boss, again, that mindset of equity mindset and that coaching mindset in order to be able to make sure that bosses are, you are managing your people effectively. Being recognized and valued, of course, finding ways to do it in a way that's appropriate for the individual. We all know some people like public praise, other people like private praise, and to really know your people and say, well, what is it that they need? What is it they want? And also, how fulfilled are they? And benefits, of course, lots of different benefits nowadays for different sorts of people, different conditions and different stages of their lives. Meaningful work and making a difference, back to the 2 things that we mentioned earlier. And then also this idea of pride in the organization, its mission and its product, that whole notion of the employee value proposition and how can you help your people be proud to work in your organization. And then finally, great work, environment and culture. And a great way to find out those things is through surveys, but really the most powerful way to do it is to have a meaningful one-to-one conversation with people and really be curious about people and curious about what it is that's going on for them. And they recommend in the book, these what we call a stay interview questions. And rather than go through them all, it's probably just good to just read through a few of those yourself and perhaps make a comment on any that you think are particularly interesting. And Ali, would you add anything to that?
No, so this is the first 6. So if you've had a chance to have a look at those, I'm just going to change the slide to the next final 6. So some really simple things, what makes for a great day. And those of you who are familiar with the Gallup Q12, similar, have you got a best friend at work? I mean, how weird is that? But their research shows that people who've got a best friend at work, who say yes to that, are in that group who tend to be more engaged. So I think there's some really powerful stuff in here in terms of the conversations we should be having with people.
And I like that one down in the bottom row, what will keep you here, but also not shying away from that awkward question as well. What might entice you away? To really be clear about what are the sorts of things that might tempt someone to leave. Because sometimes people find it easier to answer that question than go, well, what do I need to do to be a better manager? They might say other things if you ask rephrase and rephrase the questions to get more of that really interesting stuff?
So we've been talking about having one-to-one conversations. We're also starting to open the territory here for asking questions. So not just at individual level, but at team level and organization level. And the idea of, we start to get into the realm of having surveys. And, you can do a survey around these questions. And if you want to know more about that, then get in touch, because we've got a tool that we can use to do that. But also, we've got another range of insight that we can use to tell us what people really want individually and collectively within teams and across the organization. And that's from Harrison assessments, looking at our behavior analytics and insights. And the Harrison approach identifies 8 categories of engagement expectations, which really are sort of individual psychological phenomena. They're the things that really are particular to us as an individual. And look, there are no surprises here. People want development and appreciation. They want remuneration, different communication requirements. How I need you to be communicating with me as my manager and as my colleague. Levels of authority. There are personal expectations. These have very much come to the fore post-pandemic, I think. And also social. People have missed being with people and that work-life balance. So we've got 8 categories which pull together a variety of different preferences. And the great thing is that we can see these on our analytics dashboard across the organization, which I know this is a really super busy slide. David, did you want to have a chat about this one?
Yeah, I do. I really like this. Again, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of information here, but actually when you begin to interpret it, you can see that this is a selection of data about what this particular team feels is important with regards to their wants, because you can see each of those items along the top is a want, wants development, wants advancement, wants to lead, etc.
And it's worth pointing out that they're ordered in order of preference. Yep. So this wants development scores 8.9 through to wants personal help is 2.4. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing about the data is that it's actually automatically aligned. So this is actually demonstration data. So we've got the right to be able to share it with people. It's not data from a specific company, but it does match the trends that we tend to see anecdotally with all of our clients, where wants development, wants advancement are certainly things that are very predominantly at the top of the list. Now, just to explain, the question asks what's most important for you, and you can score on that. But then it asks for certain questions, anything that scores above 6 as an importance factor, they ask you, how fulfilled are you in it? And with wants advancement, we can see at a glance that 57 people are saying that they want advancement, but they're not fulfilled in it. That's a flight risk. So we can immediately click on that and find some very interesting data sitting behind it about what these individuals may actually have as a desire. What does advancement mean for them? Because for some people, it's not necessarily promotion. It might be more technical expertise. And to have an individual conversation with them. But it also shows some other interesting data. If we see there wants high pay, in this case, and again, we see this quite a lot, it's much lower down the list. So, for 147 people in the gray bar there, it's not even an issue. It's not that high an issue. It's like, yeah, pay me a fair amount, but that's it. I've got enough. There are other things that are much more important to me. And within that group, okay, 22 people, yes, there is an issue with some people. Again, we can target them. We can have a conversation with them. Orla, you mentioned what happens if there's something that you can't have any control over. At least you can begin to manage the conversation and have an open and honest conversation with them so that there's no surprises, that if they are going to leave because of salary, you can begin to say, well, how can we manage this conversation? And at least it's open. So the next thing is to look at, if you see the first graph there, we've got wants advancement on a score of 0 to 10 across the x-axis across the bottom, and then levels of fulfillment on the y-axis. And if we just look at the one that Ali circled there at 30% fulfillment, this person is not happy. They want advancement, 8 is very important for them, but they're not fulfilled. So then we need to look over to see, well, what actually is going on for them personally? And when we look at their data, we can actually see at a glance that their level of wanting a challenge, because it also asks how much challenge do you want? They're only at 3 or 3.5 on one's challenge. So maybe we need to have a conversation, go like, if you want advancement, that could be promotion or it could be more technical expertise. It'll certainly mean more responsibility. Where are you at with the level of challenge that you want at the moment? Because this is saying that you don't really want that much. What's going on in your life? What's going on at home? Or what's going on generally that you feel that you don't want any more challenges? Because perhaps this isn't a good time for you to get that advancement or to have that extra responsibility. And if they go, yeah, you're right, the pandemic, school children and going through exams and, parents to look after, I've got quite a lot on my plate at the moment. And we are finding that at the moment, that quite a lot of people have a more reduced wants challenge than we've seen pre-pandemic. At least we're having a conversation with them. We're having a meaningful conversation about what's going on for them, what's happening in their life, and how to balance their life so that they get what they want, which would be advancement, but at an appropriate time when they're ready to cope with it, rather than promoting them just because they want it and then have them fall over because they burn out.
So in bringing our session to a close, before we go into questions, we're going to wrap up really by summarizing there are 5 key questions that managers need to ask their people. Or in fact, starting with, what do they need to ask themselves? So they need to ask themselves, well, what's my mindset as a manager? Am I managing those paradoxes that we talked about? Am I looking at your needs, my needs? Are we talking about needs? Am I enforcing performance with warmth and empathy, that coaching mindset? Who do I need to focus on? Who are the people who are frustrated and who are about to walk out the door? And what's most important to them individually and collectively? And then what can I do? And I know that we've got some stuff in the chat about, well, maybe we can't do anything about that. And you know what? Sometimes we can't, but sometimes the very fact of having that conversation can alleviate some of the frustration. And sometimes the very best thing you can do for people is to help them to move on to their next job somewhere else and keep the door open for them to come back with their new skills later. And that's something actually that the McKinsey report picks up very explicitly. And what can they do to unlock their own engagement? And that's where the Harrison engagement expectations report really does give us some insight into sometimes people are just getting in their own way. So.
Well, actually, because if you just go back, Ali, to that slide about what we can do. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to let everybody know that there's stuff that you can actually do yourselves from all of the stake questions that we explored. You need to think about who are your team and what questions would be the most appropriate questions to have as a conversation with them. But if you want to do this en masse, as we said, there's a shortcut, and the shortcut can really get nailed down on who do I need to focus on, what's most important to them, what can I do and what can they do. That's all there in the data. So at the click of a button for a very low price, you can actually get that data on everyone in your team, in your organization, and your department.
So over to you, folks. I'm going to take the screen share down and see if we can take some of the questions. Nigel, have you been wrangling some questions for me?
I've got some for you, but thanks first of all, David and Ali. That was really, really interesting, and just some of the notes I made myself around, particularly something that's passionate I'm about, psychological safety, something I'm very, very hot on personally, and that performance expectation curves. And yeah, it was just reminding me of a session I ran a few weeks ago with some sales leaders. So they're definitely around there. So we've got some questions in the chat. So thanks for that. So please keep adding them. One that came in by somebody I know but who couldn't attend today. So I'm going to share the recording with them. So hi Paul, if you're watching this. The question he wanted to ask, and probably for David, was, in your experience, how good are managers actually at clarifying expectations?
Well, actually, that's something that Ali and I talk a lot about, is when we showed this model, the model that the expectation curve, it's a little light bulb goes off, because they go like, oh my goodness, I have all these expectations. People aren't meeting them, but how I'm not expressing them. And you just have that distinction of what's the minimum requirements, completing your job description, achieving your objectives, but also look, what's the real desire? Where do you want performance really to be? What does great look like, or what does success look like for the department? And having that engaging conversation with people about that higher standard, which is a stretch for everyone, including yourself, but that you're all going and using Mahey Csikszentmihalyi's flow model to say, come on, let's challenge ourselves here. Because the evidence shows that when people have an appropriate level of challenge, they're highly engaged, highly motivated, and want to stay.
Right. Thank you. Okay, so let's have a look. Caroline from Caroline Lees. What is your view on who should conduct stay interviews and equally exit interviews? Should it be line manager, HR? Obviously, as we can see, there's some issues around trust that come with that.
It's a really good question. Ali?
No, sorry, I was answering a message in the chat. So you take this one.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So it's really interesting. We always promote the fact that the line manager is the person who should be having these conversations, unless there's an issue with the line manager. But we want line managers to be that person who people go to in the first instance to have that relationship, that conversation. They know them, they work with them on a regular basis. They know what their performance is. They know what their foibles are. And, you know, some of the biggest breakthroughs in my career have been through a good conversation with my line manager, who then sent me in a direction that I hadn't expected, and gave me opportunities that I didn't even know were available. And I've always remembered that. And I've always been very passionate about that, to say, managers, talk to your people. You know them, you get to know them really well. And if you don't, get to know them by asking some of the stay questions. So ideally line manager, unless of course there's a relationship issue with the manager, then it's probably best if someone from HR, business partner, or perhaps another line manager who also interacts with that person does it. But I wouldn't want it to be an exclusively HR function. Yeah. We want everything to be driven by the line managers. Hopefully that answers your question.
Great. Okay. So we're almost at time. So last chance. I can see some people having to shoot off. So yeah, last chance. If anyone has, say, either wants to in the chat or wants to unmute themselves. Oh, we do have a hand up. I'm trying to see who's put that up, and now my screen's just gone really.
Teresa?
It's me, Teresa. Yeah.
Hi.
Thank you. It's very interesting. David, I just wanted to come on to that thing about the HR not doing all of the exit interviews. I mean, I've worked in lots of different organizations where the approach is different, but what I have found is that very often they just don't happen unless they are centrally managed by HR. And I think so my experience, particularly in one organization where we were having a lot of problems with people leaving, and I was actually a trustee there. Right. We couldn't see what was going wrong. So in the end, we had to bring it into HR to manage, just so that there was a more consistent, that we were actually getting that information. So I'm just wondering if there, there's any advice on that point.
So I'll take that one. Teresa, really good to see you after such a long time.
Ali. Yeah.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, I think absolutely. I think I certainly would never want to minimize the role of HR, fundamentally important. And I think particularly to take that oversight, strategic view on things and to make sure that things are happening as they should. I think with exit interviews, there's a good reason for that to not be with the line manager, because you may not get the honest feedback about the line manager to them directly. When we're talking about stay interviews, I'm definitely with David. I think that's definitely primarily, first and foremost, the domain of the line manager, because they're the one having that relationship. And I think HR has a really key role to play to make sure that managers are equipped with the skill set that they need to have those conversations confidently, because often I suspect the reason that conversations don't happen as intended are because managers shy away because they think that they can't handle it or it's going to go badly. David?
Well, exactly that point. A lot of, like what Orla mentioned earlier, it was a good question that Orla mentioned around, like, oh yeah, what happens if they start asking pay? I don't have any authority to make any decisions around that. that very thought can have managers be sort of offish and not want to talk about anything, where we encourage managers to actually say, bring it on, talk about it. And if pay is an issue, let's talk about what that is. Because quite honestly, a lot of employees simply don't understand the economics of a business or an organization, that there are limitations on what can be paid, and that they need to have a real reality check. But also, if then that is a big issue and they simply cannot afford to work here anymore, let's talk about how we can help them to move on again and be like gregarious and have a growth mindset, generous, I mean, and have a growth mindset, so that you help that person move on. They'll remember you forever. And who knows, they might come back at a later stage. So we try to have managers have the confidence to deal with all of those conversations and have a number of different answers to address the issues, even the awkward ones that may come up.
Thanks, David. And that's actually, to wrap up, that's reminding me, I remember, if those of us, I think we remember the credit crunch, and was it 08, 09? Now, that was long before I joined Harrison, but the company I was working for, there were salary cuts to keep the company afloat. But I think the company did, the company I was working at the time did a good job of being open and honest and explained. And some people said, look, I'm really sorry, I simply cannot afford. And some people and some people said, but the way it was communicated, I thought was really really important. So thanks again, Ali and David. Really enjoyed that. Very much appreciate your time. We're going to be running these probably on a quarterly basis. So please keep a lookout. The next one, 27th of September. I haven't got a topic yet, but that's when we're planning the next one. So please, you can see, obviously, we've got contact details. Connect with me, Ali and David on LinkedIn. Follow the Harrison LinkedIn page, because that's where we'll be promoting it, amongst other places. And again, thank you very much for your time, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Very happy to join on LinkedIn, and let us know if you're showing any interest in any of the stuff that we talked about. Love to chat to you about it. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Bye. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.